I better unmute, I guess. Okay. So, my name is Peter Misson. I am a recovered alcoholic. My sober date is 11th of December 1981. I was 34 years old when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm 74 years old now. So I spent over half of my life in Alcoholics Anonymous. My actual birthday is the 12th of August, and I was born in 1947, just in time, because Alcoholics Anonymous came to the UK in March 1947. So by the time I needed Alcoholics Anonymous, it was 34 years old in the UK, and it was mature enough for me to find sobriety in a little island called Jersey. I was born in that little island called Jersey, and it was once described as 60,000 alcoholics clinging to a rock in the middle of the English Channel. Well, now apparently it's 90,000 alcoholics clinging to a rock in the English Channel. I heard that from a friend of mine in Jersey the other day. And it was plus one, and that was me. I'm not going to tell you too much about my drinking because my drinking is a very long time away, but I remember it perfectly. I don't remember my first drink. My first drink was about 3 months old when I had my first drink. Apparently, it was a soup spoon or tablespoon of brandy given to me by a doctor who was a Jewish doctor who circumcised me. And I got the brandy before I was circumcised. So I'm not without being indelicate. That was my very first drink. The second time when I passed out drinking I was about 7 years old, I think, and it was Christmas time, and I was drinking my grandfather's Dubonnet that he left on the table. And I liked it so much that I poured some more. And I ended up being carried upstairs and put to bed, basically passed out. But nothing more happened until I was about 14, and I was hanging out with some older guys, and I started to drink, and I got exactly what Bill describes in Bill's story. I suddenly discovered alcohol, and alcohol did for me what I couldn't do for myself. I fitted in suddenly. I wasn't I was very tall and skinny when I was that age. So I could kind of hang out with older guys without people being sort of too shocked about this kid, you know. And I got in with the drinking crowd straight away. They seemed to be my kind of folks, and they bought me drinks, and it was really good. And one of the things I discovered very early on was if you put a shot of brandy in your pint of cider, it goes really well. Those two together, I used to like that. When I left school early, I was supposed to go to art school, and I didn't. I decided to follow in the family tradition, which is go to sea, and that's a perfect place for an alcoholic. You see, because if you're on a ship, they feed you, they give you somewhere to sleep, and they pay you. And if you go if you go outside of the UK limits, then you get bonded stores. And bonded stores is tax-free, totally tax-free alcohol and cigarettes. And I started drinking, and it was fine. And you know, I had a lot of fun in the early days with alcohol. It was my buddy, and it allowed me to have my career at sea and get to the dizzy heights of captain of a ship. And that's about as high as I got. And then I started to crumble. And then I was a daily drinker, and I was a top-up drinker. And then it's all started to go wrong. I got to this place where I was driving ships, and I decided, and also I went to a place where I was invited to become a pilot, sea pilot for the island of Jersey. And I had to take an exam. And on the day of the exam, I felt nervous. So I reached under the seat of my car to where I had a bottle of vodka. And I thought, I'll just have a couple of mouthfuls of vodka before I go, just to still my nerves before I go and do this exam. I've been working 6 years for this exam. And those 2 mouthfuls of vodka became half a bottle. And by the time I got on board the ship to do the exam, I was drunk and I nearly put the ship on the rocks, and the examiner had to step in, and I was told that I had to stay. I could be re-examined again in 3 months' time. And I was told by the people I was going to work for, don't drink for those 3 months. And I didn't. But past the exam in 3 months' time, within 5 minutes of passing the exam, I was drinking. I had a drink in my hand and I was drinking with the examiner. And what was interesting was that some years later, after being in Alcoholics Anonymous for a little while, I ended up 12-stepping the examiner. But that's neither here nor there. He didn't want to come anyway. But that's all. All you need to know about my drinking was, when I start to drink, I can't stop. I can't control how much I drink. I don't know where I'm going to end up when I drink. I don't know what the consequences are going to be. The consequences were pretty dire. The other thing is that when I'm not drinking, I'm not necessarily thinking about drinking, but it seems to show up on a regular basis. And I get to a place where I'm irritable, as the doctor describes in the big book, irritable, restless, and discontented, this internal condition that makes it so uncomfortable not to drink, because I know what alcohol will do, because alcohol fixed me. And alcohol fixed me for about 15 of those 20 years that I was drinking. But I got to tell you, for the last 5 years, it didn't work anymore. It didn't fix me. And I lost pretty much everything. I broke pretty much everything. I lost my career. I lost a business. I lost my marriage. I lost my parents. My dad, bless him. My dad got blackout drunk once during the Second World War in Southampton during an air raid. And he woke up in the street and he said, if this is what happens to me when I drink too much, I'm never going to do it again. And he never did. But my poor old dad had to pick me up off the street several times towards the end of my drinking, and it broke his heart. But he didn't stop loving me. And that's an amazing thing. And what the amazing thing is, or the better thing is, that when I got sober, I was able to make amends to him and to have a relationship with my father that I had not had since I was a kid till the day he died. And that was my amends to my dad, was to be his son to the end. And I was proud of him and he was proud of me. And we were together when he died. And that was a spiritual experience, I've got to tell you. I came into AA. I made a call one night. I can remember what it was like. The night that I called on the 10th, it was the night of the 10th of December, 1981. And I'd been drinking for weeks. And it had got very, very dark. I don't know quite what was going on, but it's almost like my peripheral vision had disappeared, and it was very, very dark. And I can remember the floor going black. That's all I can remember, the floor going black and me falling into that black abyss. That's what I can remember happening. And it suddenly occurred to me, I ended up on my knees on the floor, looking up at the ceiling, saying, please God, I don't want to die. And I got the idea of calling Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I don't know with any certainty that I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous before I had that thought. Now, there is a guy in Jersey called Cliff Lassie, And Cliff Lassie, maybe, we were drinking buddies, maybe when I was in blackout, came to see me and told me about Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know. But he certainly came to see me about 6 months before I made the call in a terrible state, asking me if I had any booze. And I did, but I said, no, I don't have any booze. And it was all in the fridge. It was mine. He wasn't having any. But I gave him a bowl of miso soup. You know, I was drinking my food in those days as well as drinking. I wasn't eating. I gave him a bowl of miso soup, and we had this bowl of miso soup together, and he went away. Now, whether he came to see me, because he went into Alcoholics Anonymous very soon after that, and I didn't know that. I ended up living in one room in that house. My wife had left, whatever. The mortgage was up. I couldn't afford it. The whole thing was falling apart. And that night, something happened. I had this idea of calling Alcoholics Anonymous. So I called Alcoholics Anonymous. But then I looked in the telephone book. We had a telephone book in those days. Looked in the telephone book, and I couldn't find Alcoholics Anonymous because I was too drunk, because I couldn't spell Alcoholics Anonymous. I happen to know that it's the second number in the book, because the first one is AAA taxis, and the second one is AA. But I didn't know that. I was looking for Alcoholics Anonymous. I couldn't see it. But I knew where to look, because there was another outfit that I used to call on a regular basis, because I was not just a practicing alcoholic, but I was also a practicing suicide. And I used to phone up the Samaritans. And the Samaritans in the yellow pages had a big box at the bottom of a page. And I called them up and I said, I want to talk to someone from Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't know how to get in touch with them. They asked me where I lived. They said, are you drinking? I said, yes. He said, well, try not to drink anymore. Someone will come and see you in 20 minutes. And 20 minutes later, almost to the minute, although I was passed out by that time, because I went around and drank everything in the house, because I knew I was going to stop drinking. So I went around and I drank everything I could find. So by the time they arrived, I was passed out on the floor pretty much. But I remember two shadowy figures coming in, and I know now that they were a gentleman called Noel and a lady called Judith, and they picked me up off the floor, put me on the settee, chucked a blanket over me, said, don't drink anymore, don't move, somebody will come to see you in the morning. And about 10 o'clock in the morning, there was the front door bell rang, and standing there was this little guy, shorter than me. I'm a wreck anyway, but wasn't shorter than me. And he said, my name's Billy. I'm an alcoholic. I believe you want to quit drinking. And he had a Scottish accent, and I hated Scotsmen at the time. I got to tell you, I really did, with a passion. And I thought, okay, well, and he walked in, and he had a jacket on like me now, and he had a big book under his arm, and he sat down. He was they reminded me of, not the time, but later on, it looked like a bit like the Mormons used to do. But anyway, he came in and sat down. He sat down next to me, and I was wearing a pair of jeans that hadn't been washed for maybe 6 months, and I was a mess. I had a bucket alongside of me because I was puking all the time, and I was shaking, and I was sweating, and I was a mess. And he started to tell me about his drinking. And I'm saying, I drink like that. I drink like that. Yeah, that's me. I do that. I do that. And then he started to call himself an alcoholic. And after a while, I said to him, Billy, if since you told me how you drink and you call yourself an alcoholic, then I must be an alcoholic. And he said, you are very sick. And if you read the first page of chapter 7, it tells us to remind ourselves that when we're on a 12-step call, that they are very sick. Billy was following the book. I didn't know that at the time. You know, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I worked the 12 steps. I got sober. He took me through the 12 steps in the big book. Not as fast as I know how to do it now, But we went through the 12 steps. We were taught the big book was on the table in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. When we used to read at the beginning of the meetings, and we used to read, somebody used to hand someone the big book and say, can you read something from the big book? And we all knew, because this is what the meetings would always say, there's 3 things you can read out of the big book. You can read the first 3 pages, either chapter 3, 5, or 11. And that was it. So we got handed the book, and it was our choice as to whether it was the first 2.5 pages or 3 pages of 3, 5, or 11. More about alcoholism. There is a solution. How more about alcoholism, how it works, and a vision for you. And about the 3rd meeting, I heard the first page of A Vision for You, and I knew about the 3rd meeting. I knew that whoever wrote this big book, or this book, I didn't know it was called the big book yet. whoever wrote this book knew about alcoholism, because that first page of that chapter, A Vision for You, describes exactly what I was feeling like and what I'd been waking up to every morning for the last 5 years. The hideous 4 horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, despair. I believed that I'd hurt too many people around me, that it would be better if I checked out. And I had been trying to kill myself 3 times in a row. And the last time it was very, very close. Okay, that's the end of my drinking. Now it's the journey. And I got to tell you that what's happened to me, because Billy showed up. He was a lorry driver, by the way, a truck driver, and he drove some of the biggest trucks in the island. They were big. They could only go on certain roads, just between the harbour and because they were so big. And he normally worked in a green overall. And where he parked his truck that morning, I have no idea, because it was mid-morning. He should have been working. Now, where he parked it, I don't know, because I lived up a hill. And he showed up in a jacket, and a pair of slacks, and shiny shoes. Now, what he'd done with his work boots and his green overall, I have no idea. I never asked him. I wish I had, because I've never figured out whether he got time off to come and see me or whatever it was. But he looked like a recovered alcoholic, and the difference between him and me was very, very different. And it was one of the first lessons that I learned. When you go on a 12-step call, look like a recovered alcoholic, because they'll believe you more. Because I believed there was something in him that wasn't in me at the time. But I had prayed that night. I looked up at the ceiling, 10th of December 1981. I looked up at the ceiling and I said, please God, I don't want to die. And I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous 24 hours later. The first meeting, I can't remember much about it because I was detoxing like a mad dog. The second one was kind of weird. The third one, I heard Vision for You. And that got me, because they were describing how I felt and what it was like. Billy took me through the 12 steps through the big book. They didn't know any other way. They didn't know any other way. What had happened, I found out later, was that Alcoholics Anonymous had disappeared about 5 years before, because everybody just went out and got drunk. And there was a bunch of Glaswegians and Irish folks in Jersey working on construction. And they needed meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, so they started it again. And in the meeting that I used to go to, there was a guy in the back of the room who was probably one of the refounders of Alcoholics Anonymous, called Dr. John. And Dr. John was a big guy, and Dr. John remembered me when I was a kid. And he remembered me when I was apprentice pilot, and he remembered me when I was a pilot. And Dr. John used to sit in the back of the room. And if somebody started talking about all their problems, he'd say, we don't want to hear about that crap. We want to hear about what you're doing about them. And then he used to shut up. He hardly said anything. And in the end, Dr. John was dying of stomach cancer and nobody knew. He was still showing up in meetings and he didn't say a word. And he kept on being Dr. John. And we had Jimmy the Scar. And we had Dick the Blade. And we had all the other characters. I mean, tell you, there were some characters. And I loved that. It was just amazing. I was surrounded by gangsters. One of the guys in particular that picked me up off the floor, Noel, he came from an Irish gangster family from Dagenham, of all places. But they were well known in Dagenham. When on chapter 5, one of the best kept secrets in Alcoholics Anonymous, because we read it out at the beginning of every meeting, and now it's separated from the big book by a laminated sheet. And I hate laminations because it's taken the big book off the table. You don't need the big book anymore because chapter 5 is on a laminated sheet now, so you don't need to open the big book. So the big book disappears off the table of Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to an entire convention one time, the South of England convention, and I didn't see a big book at all. And I was asked to share, and I said, I don't see a big book on the table, but I brought my own, and I had a pocket edition in my jacket. And I said, I brought my own, because this is where the solution is, not in meetings, not in telling everybody about your stuff. They didn't like me very much in that convention. But it says the first sentence of chapter 5, it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Okay, now thoroughly following means that you don't stray from it, that you keep on it. Okay, thoroughly followed the path. So we've got to follow this path. The next thing it says halfway down, after it says honest 3 times, it says, if you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And what have we got? Well, they've already told us, you see, in the big book. And it's not sobriety. What we got is in the middle of page 25. You see, I came here to get sober. But what I found was in the middle of page 25. And it says this, the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact in our lives today is the absolute certainty our Creator has entered into our hearts in a way which is indeed miraculous. He is or she has commenced to accomplish those things for which we would never do by ourselves. It doesn't talk about alcohol once. After the first step, they don't talk about alcohol anymore. It's the first half of the first step. Carl Jung is one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous because Carl Jung had a spiritual experience. He saw God. He had the spiritual experience, did Carl Jung. And he said the only way that alcoholics of your type, to a gentleman called Roland Hazard, the only way that alcoholics of your type can recover is by a spiritual experience. And he wrote down in Latin, it's spiritus conspiritum, which is spirituality against alcohol spirits. And he told that to Roland Hazard. Roland Hazard told that to Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher told Bill. Bill told Dr. Bob. And thank God somebody told me. And Carl Jung is by rights a founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, though he wasn't an alcoholic. Very amazing gentleman. The other thing, next thing it says on chapter 5, when we get to page 60, it says, the principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Okay, So if these 12 steps are guides to progress, then do we just do them once and then we're all okay? Well, someone will say, well, we live in step 10, 11, and 12. Well, yes, we do. But we've got to get into step 9 first. But then I'm 10 years sober. I almost drank. Or 16 years sober, shall I say. Because at 10 years sober, I started to think that life wasn't treating me right. And I decided that I needed certain things to make my life better. One was a lot of money. 2 was a sexy wife. And probably a girlfriend. I mean, I was, kind of, 1 is not enough, eh? Alcoholics, see, I do stuff alcoholically. I wanted status, property, you name it, I wanted it. And I had this bucket list, and I set out to get this bucket list, and it took me 6 years to get it. And I left a trail of damage, tornado damage. Every alcoholic is like a tornado, roaring through the lives of others. Sober, I left a trail of damage on the south coast of England that took several years to clear up. I got to tell you, when I did amends, because I almost drank. And I got to a place where I had actually 2 drinks in my hand in a restaurant, serving some customers, and the bottle said to me, see, you've screwed up this time, you might as well drink. And I ended up back out in the road, back out looking at the sky this time, not the ceiling, at the sky, asking God what happened there. Because what had happened was the previous 5 years or 6 years, I'd been backing out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd stopped helping people through the 12 steps. I was taught to do that when I first came to AA. I actually sponsored somebody before I'd finished the steps. My sponsor said, there's a new guy over there, you can take him through the first 5 steps. And that's how I was sponsored and I stopped doing that. Okay, I stopped doing 10 and 11, praying and meditating. I didn't do 10. We never really did 10 properly. I had some outstanding amends, mostly around relationships, because I thought, oh, well, if I do that, I'm going to hurt them. No, I don't have to go there. So I had some outstanding amends. I hadn't done inventory for a very long time. I ended up thinking that, well, the 3rd step prayer was pretty good. That was okay. God will look after me. And then I stopped going to meetings because I was too busy. And people will say it was because I stopped going to meetings that I almost drank. And I'm going to tell you that wasn't the reason. The reason was that I stopped living this way of life that we have in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because the 12 steps are not a gadget to get sober. I have learned that the 12 steps are a spiritual path that opens us up to a power greater than ourselves, whatever you want to call that power, that will solve our problem. I'll tell you today, at 40 years sober, there is nothing I do that keeps me sober. Nothing. All I do is I practice the 12 steps. I visit and revisit the 12 steps on a regular basis. I do my best to live in step 10, 11, and 12, which is a condensed version of the 9 steps, the first 9 steps, and then 10, 11, and 12. And what that does, it keeps me open to a power that keeps me sober, because I cannot keep myself sober by myself. Now, I learned very early on in Alcoholics Anonymous, I heard some tapes by some the cassette recorders had just come out, and I heard some cassette tapes. And I heard some people speaking. And when I almost drank, I was given a gift by God, which was a detached retina, and I had to lay down for 3 months. And in those 3 months, I was back at home in Jersey, and I got my dad to go upstairs and find the shoebox that I knew was in the cupboard with all these tapes in. And I found these tapes, and I found the box of Joe and Charlie tapes. And Joe and Charlie were the people who kept the big book alive when nobody was using the big book in Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a few folks in different places. There was a guy in Northern California that used to record his studies of the big book on a tape-to-tape recorder and mail them out. Bob Stonebreaker, his name was. He was doing his garage all by himself. Bob S. There was a few, but by the time I got back into Alcoholics Anonymous, 16 years after I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, nobody was using the big book anymore. It wasn't even on the table. Everything had been laminated now. Nobody was reading from it. Nobody was talking about God. Nobody was talking about the steps. They were just talking about their problems. Isn't that funny? I didn't even notice it happen. And it had happened. And it took me a long time to find someone to sponsor me through the 12 steps. And by the time I had this detached retina, the only people who could take me through the 12 steps were Joe and Charlie on tape. And I used to stop the tape and read the book with one eye. And when they said write stuff down, I used to, with one eye, stop the tape and write it down. And I call my friend Cliff Lassie. And the story about Cliff Lassie is that somewhere about the third week of my sobriety, Cliff walked into a meeting, and he was looking smart. He had this jacket on and stuff, and he walked in, and he came up behind me, and he put his arm on my shoulder, and he said, "What kept you so long?" Because he was the guy that I said that if I ever get as bad as Cliff, I'm going to have to do something about my drinking. And he always looked at me and said the same thing. And we were buddies for years and years and years. We'd surfed together, we'd drunk together, we'd done all sorts of crazy stuff together. And he's still sober. He's still in Jersey. I'm living someplace else. But this is a journey. And once I realized, after getting almost drinking at 16 years sober, I realized that there was more in this big book than I thought. And I started to seek out teachers in Alcoholics Anonymous. Some I met in person, some I only heard on tape. There's a gentleman called Don P. I wish I'd have been able to meet Don P. I really do. From Don P, there comes Mark Houston and Joe Hawk. Now, I'm not sure about Joe, but Mark I met. And Mark and I had quite a long conversation because he ended up in a padded cell at 8 years sober, and I ended up almost drinking at 16 years sober. And he told me that some Native American had said to him, it goes in fours. So you go figure. So it goes in fours. 4, 8, 12, 16. He was 8 years, I was 12. And we did that, and it was because of the same thing. He wanted to get what he wanted in order to survive, and I wanted to get what I wanted in order to survive on this planet. And as I did that, my ego grew and grew and grew until it was almost the size of the planet. And I started to understand that that statement, these are principles we have set down are guides to progress, is that to revisit the 12 steps on a regular basis is a very, very interesting exercise. Here I am 40 years sober. Do I still think that the first step applies to me? Do I still think that I am powerless over alcohol when I haven't had a drink for 40 years? Or a mind-altering, or anything mind-altering, by the way. I was a good hippie, I did lots of LSD. Smoked a lot of dope too, but it didn't do what alcohol did, none of it. Do I still think that I'm powerless over alcohol? I have an allergic reaction to alcohol, the doctor tells me. And I have heard, and I don't want to test it, that as you get older, that allergy gets worse. So if I took a drink today, I would be powerless over alcohol. I would be drunk in a very short time. The other thing I've noticed about folks in Alcoholics Anonymous is when they come into Alcoholics Anonymous and they go out again, sometimes they come back and sometimes they don't. And the longer they've been in Alcoholics Anonymous, the harder it is for them to come back. So watch out for relapse. Have all the relapses before you come to AA. Because some folks have relapses and we don't see them anymore. My grand sponsor, Cliff Bishop from Dallas, Texas, used to say there was 3 ways of getting sober. One was locked up. The other one was covered up in the graveyard. And the other one was sobered up through working the 12 steps in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I've now learned is that these 12 steps are guides to progress. And that every time I go through these 12 steps, something happens. It's about every couple of years. I am still powerless over alcohol. Is my life unmanageable? Well, it is when I try. That doesn't mean to say I haven't got plans. But I leave the result in God's hands now. I don't try and manipulate it so I get it, which is what I used to do. There's something that used to happen to me in sobriety, which was a spree, and it was an anger spree. And I used to get rages like a 4-year-old. Well, I've got to tell you, a 45-year-old man throwing himself around like a 4-year-old is very, very intimidating to the people around you. And it was like an out-of-body experience. I've got to tell you, it was very weird. And I used to suffer from road rage as well. And all of these things, you see, have gone now because I work and rework the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you can do the 12 steps as things turn up. Well, I do the 12 steps on all sorts of things. Step 2. Do I believe that the power that I believe in is big enough to get me from where I am right now to another place? A place better than where I am right now. This is how I work the steps today. It's not how I worked the steps when I first came to AA. But I ask myself now, do I believe that this power that I have, I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I would be breaking the 10th tradition. And I don't want to do that, because the traditions have become also very, very important to me. And they should be for everybody as well. If you're a member of a group in Alcoholics Anonymous, you should at least have a working knowledge of the 12 traditions, because they are very important for our unity in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've seen groups fall apart because they've ignored the 12 traditions. There's a very easy pamphlet. It's called The Illustrated Guide to the 12 Traditions. It's very cheap and it's beautiful because it explains the traditions in a very, very easy, simple way. I recommend everybody do that. And the other thing is, this power greater than me can restore me to sanity. Well, what's my current insanity? I can test that as what my current insanity is. It takes some prayer and meditation to figure it out, but it's usually everything I think I got control over. Then I make a decision to once more turn my will, which is my thinking, my life, which is my actions, over to the care of this power. But I don't use that. I don't use that version of the third step. I go over the page, and on page 60, after the A, B, and C, it says, being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Now, it's not semantics. There is a difference between putting yourself in the care of God and handing your will and your life over to God. There's a difference. You see, if I turn my will and my life over to the care of God, then I want God to look after me. But step 3 says that God is my director, that I'm an actor, yes, but I need directions from a power greater than me, which is the director. A film actor will not be able to to get a good film unless he follows the directions from a director. The director knows what the whole film's going to look like. The actor doesn't, he just does his bit. Particularly now when we have all these electronic stuff going on in the background. You know, half of the scenery now is produced by a computer. The actor on the stage doesn't see it until he gets to see the film. But the director has the vision in his head. So I hand my will and my life back to God again one more time. Then I get to step four, and I do inventory. And the way I do inventory is that I do it with prayer and meditation. And I first of all ask myself, am I resentful towards anyone? Yes, I've done 10 step. Oh yes, okay, I've done a 10 step. Oh yes, I've done nightly review. My experience of resentments are that if I hold the resentment for long enough, it leaves a shadow. And that shadow puts a shadow between me and God. And if those shadows build up, they get to a place where I am separate from this power and I'm running on self-will. It's a very interesting thing. You see, if I get one resentment, the light starts to go out. They tell us where God is. It's within us. And if I keep on holding resentments, the light goes out. And in the end, the light goes out completely, but I'm still sober. I'm still not drinking, but I'm not in touch with the power that is within me. And so I do inventory and I find stuff when I do inventory. When I do prayerful inventory, I find stuff. Prayer and meditation. And do you know what I found the last time I went through inventory? I went through inventory in January, February, and March. It took me 3 months to go through the 12 steps. And I did it with prayer and meditation on every step. And in the 4th step, I found a regret that I had carried with me for about 32 years. More than that, 36 years. A regret. Now, regret is a resentment because I was re-feeling something that I did, a decision I made all those years ago, sober. And I had a regret about that, and it kept on coming up. And I thought with previous runs through the steps, I thought that I had got rid of it, that it had gone. But it was still there, and it was very, very deep. Now, I believe it's gone now. But that's the great thing. It's like peeling an onion, you know. Progress, not perfection. Step 5, I do step 5. I did step 5 with a fellow. We exchanged step 5s with a fellow member. I have also done multiple step 5s with multiple people, where 5 or 6 of us it was, exchanged 5th steps. That's a very interesting thing. A gentleman up in Chicago called Paul Martin, when he used to talk, he used to say, work and rework the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what they used to do in their group. I see I'm coming up to time. I better get through these steps quick. Once we've done a 5th step, I then look at the 6th step, and the 6th step says we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Entirely ready. It says we have emphasized willingness in being indispensable, willingness to do this once more time, to submit one more time to these 12 steps. Because I know what's going to happen at the end of it, you see. I know that I'm going to be even more free than I am now. But over time, I will put myself back into the slavery of alcoholism. That's the way my default way of thinking is selfish and self-centered. Okay, that's why I need this power greater than me. So I get entirely ready to have God remove all these things that I found are objectionable. This regret, these petty little annoying little resentments that keep on popping up again and again and again and again in 10 steps and in 11-step reviews. Petty little things, but those petty little things block me from a power greater than myself. You see, by holding resentment, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. It's a disconnect between our thinking and our brain and our heart. I believe the Spirit dwells in the heart and the alcoholic dwells in the brain. And we need the connection between our hearts, because that's what it tells us where God is. In We Agnostics, it says that God is deep within us, not out there. These 12 steps are not only spiritual in nature, they are revolutionary in nature, that they are mystical in nature. I've had a great opportunity to read some wonderful spiritual literature from centuries ago, and they're talking about what we're talking about this God within us. And when we get to the 7th step, we think we've surrendered at the 3rd step, but when we get to the 7th step, it says, my Creator, I'm now willing you should have all of me, good and bad. If we go to page 61, you'll see that we may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing, as long as somebody pats us on the head and says what a wonderful bloke we are, or we get our way. But if that doesn't work, we may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. So it's take all of me, because I don't know what to do with my good stuff. I use my good stuff to get what I want, if I'm being selfish. So I don't make an asset list when I do a 12-step, because my assets are weapons to get my way. Because I'm selfish and self-centered to the core when I'm not in touch with a power greater than myself. And then it says, I pray you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. That's not every defect of character. It's only the ones that that are in between me, my fellows, and God. But maybe not every defect of character. I don't get to choose anymore. I'm no longer running the show. Then we get to step 8 and 9. And while we're doing step 8 and 9, we've got to be doing step 10 and 11. And step 10 and 11 are interlocked. They are interlocked. They're not one step, they are interlocked. They are two facets. One, the 10th step is on the go. What are we watching for? We're watching for exactly the same character defects as we found in the 4th step. Selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear. We watch. When we do inventory, don't destroy the inventory. I burnt my inventory. Why? You need to have it in front of you to look at it so that you know what you're looking for in step 10 on a daily basis. This is how you get to be 40 years sober. We practice and practice and practice these 12 steps. We live in these 12 steps. It's not hard. It's wonderful. Because when God is in your heart, it opens up the world. It really does. I cannot, it sounds really, oh, it's rigid, oh, you're so rigid. Yeah, I don't want to die or go insane. The last guy that I saw die was a guy who was 16 years sober. And he 13-stepped somebody, left his wife and his young daughter, ended up shacking up with this woman in the same town as his wife and daughter lived, just down the road, started drinking, got psychotic, couldn't stop. I tried to take him through the steps 3 times. My buddy tried to take him through the steps 2 more times. He ended up dying in the street, dying in a back street in Florence, living on the street in Florence. He used to drive one of the largest super yachts in the world. He was earning telephone numbers. And he ended up in a back street because he couldn't get back to Alcoholics Anonymous. Do I think that if I took a drink today, 40 years sober, I could get back to Alcoholics Anonymous? No way. Absolutely no way. Step 10 and 11 are so important. I don't believe that if you don't live in step 10 and 11, that when you go on a 12-step call, you'll be you will be less effective. You might be able to do the words, but you won't be able to do the heart. And when you're on a 12-step call, the heart is incredibly important. I know that my sponsor, Billy, wanted me to get sober as badly as he wanted to get sober. And when I go on a 12-step call, I relive my drinking for that person. And I want them to get sober because I know what happens to alcoholics who don't get sober. I've been around long enough to see. And that guy that died in Florence was a classic example. That he became totally psychotic because he was drinking. And it says on page 85, every day is a day we must carry the vision of God's will into all of our activities. That's what I do in the morning. What's it look like if I trust this power greater than myself in every area of my life today? Not next week, today, just today. Because you see, we don't stay sober one day at a time, we live life one day at a time. We stay sober permanently if we would live and work in these 12 steps. We stay sober permanently. If you work step 10 and 11, as they're laid out in the big book, and you watch spiritual practice of watching for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, and if in the nightly review you look at where did I miss it, and I suggest that it's written down. If you do miss it, I write it down. I got little pads. I can do a 4th step on a little pad because they taught me how to do it so well in how it works that I can do it on the back of a postage stamp if necessary. But writing it down is important because it comes out of my head and it goes onto paper and I can see it. Whereas in my head, it's just nebulous. It's running around. I write it down. Written inventory is a wonderful tool, a great tool. They give us all these wonderful tools for this wonderful life that we have. And this vision of God's will, it's a vision exercise. It's a meditation. With 10 and 11, I do nightly review on page 86 at night, and I note down any mistakes that I made today. Then tomorrow morning, I'll do it again. And I'll read it again and take note of what I've written down the night before. And then I ask God in my morning quiet time to show me how not to repeat the mistakes I made today. So the mistakes I made yesterday, please help me not repeat them today. But I'll make some new ones.